Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hi. Hello. So you've probably seen a few announcements on campus. It is PAW, Panther Alumni Week. And with me, I have one of my favorite PAWs, Pal. Paw Pal. Can I call you a Paw Pal?
You can call me Paw Pal.
Paw Pal. Some of you might already know him. This is Eric Feldman. Some people do refer to him as Mr. FIU, but he can tell you more about that. He graduated from FIU with his undergraduate degree in 2010 in criminal justice, and then came to our program and graduated in 2012. And he currently works on campus in global learning. So he's going to share with us his experiences in the program, this class, and life after graduation. And this is an interactive session, so Eric is ready and welcomes any of your questions and comments. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Blanchard. I guess I'll say that you can do the question thing while I'm talking if you want, because otherwise that'll result in me just talking a lot. I'll say that this is a little bit above my ego level of coming and talking about myself, but I do anything for Dr. Blanchard, so I'm here. And
he takes care of my
pet. I take care of her pet frog. It used to be 2 frogs, but one of them is no longer with us. So it's my second year running being her frog sitter. So that's how we are. So I thought about what is it that I have that's unique about my higher ed experience that would be valuable, because in a lot of ways it's not super remarkable. I'm only a year to 2 years ahead of you, depending on what stage you're in the program, and I'm still working at my undergrad institution. So those things are not so remarkable. So I thought about what is it that I have that's a little unique. So the 2 things I'm going to focus on is, number 1, that I don't work in student affairs necessarily, and number 2, that I created my own job. I'm the first person at FIU to have the position that I have, and I quite literally speaking wrote the job description for it, like the job description that you would get if you asked HR for it. I literally typed myself. So I think those are things that make my experience a little unique. So the Mr. FIU thing really quick, since you brought it up. So some people happen to do that, which call me that, which we'll get into how I got in higher ed, which I'm sure is similar to some of yours about being an involved undergrad. And so I was really involved in a lot of things in undergrad and grad school. So some people started calling me Mr. FIU, and there was certainly no official title. So one day I decided to check on the DMV website if Mr. FIU was taken as a Florida license plate, and it wasn't. So I now have that. And then I just was back there a week ago since my wife got a new car, and Miss FIU is also not taken. Mrs. doesn't fit on an FIU one. So in a few months she'll have Miss FIU. So I think that's going to be pretty cool. So I have a couple of questions about you guys. They're just hand-raised stuff. You don't have to talk yet. But just to help me clarify some assumptions that I have to see if they're true or not. So who is in the higher ed master's program because, like me, you were involved as an undergraduate and really enjoyed it and then realized there's a career to be had? Okay, so assumption mostly true. For those of you who didn't, can I get some idea of what got you into being in this type of master's program? Assuming that you're in the program. I don't know if there's any non-major students.
No non-major.
Okay, so for some of you that wasn't your path, how did you end up in higher ed?
Well, I was a clinical person, and due to health reasons, I changed and I went to education. So
Okay.
this kind of was a nice transition, and I'm working in that capacity now.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? One other person, maybe? I just noticed it was you 3, so sorry that I didn't remember who was over here.
Well, I went from elementary education.
Okay.
And then I just wanted more to go into higher ed.
Great, thank you. How many of you did undergrad at FIU? Okay, that's actually a little more than I thought. So that's good because that will parallel my experience. And then how many of you are intending to be on the student affairs side of things for your career? All right, awesome. So where I'm going with this works well because it kind of depended on a lot of people wanting to go in student affairs and having been involved as an undergrad like me. So the brief story of me, so I don't have to talk about myself all too much, is that I was involved as an undergraduate. There was many things that I won't list. The main thing that got me into wanting to do it as a career was peer advising, which FIU people would mostly know. If you're not from FIU, it's like an orientation leader. So I did that for 2 years. I didn't really know what I wanted to do at that time, though I had just declared criminal justice as a major because I had a hold on my account, because back then at 72 credits, if you had no major, they stopped letting you register for classes unless you chose something. So for reasons that I found it interesting, I chose that. But shortly after my first year peer advising, this is really enjoyable, helping students get acclimated to the environment and choose their classes and get involved, all that. So I told my advisor at that time, who was in charge of orientation at BBC and who's still my mentor to this day, Dr. Vicky Owls, I think that I would like to possibly do this as a career. By the way, shout out to Fabi, who was a BBC peer advisor with me. So at the next orientation, Dr. Owls said, well, let's see if this is really a career for you. Here's a walkie-talkie. I'm going to go to a meeting in the library building. I'm not coming back. If there's a fire, call me. Otherwise, you're in charge of orientation. So with that level of challenge and support that student affairs people like to call it, I was able to decide I wanted to go into the program like you guys, and she helped me, mentored me to apply for the program and all of that. My job now is kind of what's interesting, and it's the same office I had a GA-ship with. So the explaining what global learning does is always fun. But to give you the brief rundown of it, so you can see how I got to global learning, is that global learning is an undergraduate graduation requirement. There are about 140 classes at FIU that are considered global learning courses. They're throughout every single major, so there's nursing ones, there's hospitality ones, there's business ones, etc. There's also some in the university core curriculum. All students have to take at least 2 of those global learning courses, and then there's also activities that go along with it. So there's different campus events and clubs and res life stuff that go along with global learning. And I primarily work with the more student affairs side of it with those activities. I got a GA-ship in that office when I applied to be in the program in the spring, and for those of you who went through Saga days know that spring is the harder time to get a grad assistantship. So what I did in my last semester of undergrad is I made an Excel spreadsheet of every single office at FIU that I had ever heard of, which was most of them, because when you're a peer advisor you know about most of them. And then I made a list of all the directors of all of them, which again I didn't have to look up most of them because when you're a peer advisor you just know this stuff. And for the ones I didn't know, I looked up. So I had a list of most FIU departments and the directors and shot them a quick email saying, I'm starting the higher ed program. Didn't ask for an assistantship or anything. I'm starting the higher ed program and am interested in a career in higher education and would just love to chat with you about how you got to where you are and what your office does. And a majority of people responded. The particular director of global learning delegated me to her associate director, who I got to go chat with about what I was up to. And about 2 weeks later, I got an email from the director saying, we're looking for a grad assistant, and the associate director said I should contact you. And that's kind of how I got there. Something worth mentioning, the other peer advisor connection, is the way it happened at BBC at the time was that each peer advisor was responsible for a certain presentation. So some peer advisors would do, how to use Panther. Some peer advisors would use, how to not fail out in your first year of college, stuff like that. And the one that I was assigned by Dr. Alves at the time was global learning. So even though I didn't really know, I was not a super expert on it at the time, I was the person who would tell students about, global learning is this thing, you have to take these 2 classes, whatever. So when I went to go interview for the GA-ship, it took like 5 minutes because I was like, here's this whole PowerPoint presentation that I developed about you guys and presented to freshmen and transfers all summer. And that started my journey at the Global Learning Office, which at that time was mostly running the Tuesday Times Roundtable series, which a lot of you probably went to recently to see Stanley Fish speak. So that is pretty much the one thing that was part of Global Learning's activities suite when I got there. So activities at that time in January 2011 was pretty much the Tuesday Times Roundtable series, which was a much smaller thing. It originally took place in GL 220, which is a small meeting room, and had, when I got there, like 20 people per session. I'm glad you guys went, because I noticed on the attendance sheet, even though I was at home deathly ill that day, that most of the people in that room were from your class. But typically, there's 50, 60 people there, and like clockwork, next week there were 60 people there, even though your class wasn't there. So I don't know what happened where only you guys were interested in Stanley Fish's topic, because I guess it was so specific to higher ed law and academic freedom. But so that series is something that I still to this day am in charge of, and was pretty much the main thing that I did as a GA. The coordinator position didn't exist at that time. It had a director, associate director, and office manager, and just grad assistants. There was no one who was really in charge of activities. The associate director and director were really focused on the graduation requirement courses, faculty side of it, because that's such a big undertaking to completely change the university's curriculum and make every single student have to take these global learning courses and have enough of them and have them spread out across majors. That's really what they focused on, and there was nobody that was full-time in the office doing any sort of activities things. So I had a chance to experiment and beyond running the roundtables, trial and error, trying to do other things, other activities, collaborations with other departments, and do more activities than just that, so that when I was graduated, our director decided to create a coordinator position, which was to specifically focus on the co-curriculum, aka activities and things like that. So I was able to write down everything it was that I did as a GA and turn that into a coordinator position, which was very exciting. So now the activity suite is much larger. So some of the things that I do in global learning now, so there's still activities. So in addition to the Tuesday Times Roundtable, we have issues forums, which are kind of similar to what you saw if you went to the roundtable. If you didn't go to the roundtable, because not everyone was there, I presume. Basically what that is we have a room in GC every single week. We have free sandwiches, we have copies of a New York Times article, and we have a different moderator, usually faculty or staff from FIU, but not always, and they just lead in a pretty informal discussion about the New York Times article. There's free lunch. It's kind of like class but better, because there's a different subject every week, a different person talking every week, and there's food, so it's like class but a little better. No offense to class. So we do those. There's issues forums, which are similar but a little bit of a different format. There's something that I think is really cool called Connecting Countries video chats, where we either use Polycom or Skype or other teleconference technologies to connect FIU students via video chat to students in other countries to talk about some sort of issue. So it'd be like a Tuesday Times Roundtable, but instead of just talking to people in the room, you're talking to people in another country, other college students. And we've done those so far with Venezuela, Brazil, and China. So that's a pretty fun thing to do. There's student organizations, of which Global Learning supports, and I personally advise 3, 2 of which focus on working with nonprofit partners in other countries and doing service trips, but also on campus here doing really educational things above and beyond just fundraising for their own trips, but they do activities and events of their own on campus here, and one that focuses on great ape conservation and works with different local places in Florida that work with those animals. And I do a lot with communications, so making flyers, sending flyers, posting flyers on screens, social media, the website, and things like that. I think communications, I don't know if it falls into communications, but liaising with other departments, making sure that we stay in touch and in good contact with academic advisors, student affairs, etc. I work with the Global Living Learning community, which is in Everglades Hall. So there's a whole group of students on the 5th floor of Everglades Hall. So I'm sure you guys are somewhat probably familiar with living learning communities, where there's more than just living there, but there's sustained activities and programs that go on for the group of students. And so I work with the Global Living Learning one. And I'm in the process of rolling out a Global Learning graduation medallion. So kind of we went from having the Tuesday Times Roundtable to having all the things I just talked about, which was pretty much my tenure from graduate assistant through my second year being coordinator was developing all those things out of just the Tuesday Times Roundtable. So now that we have all these, it's kind of like this jumble of you can do this and you can do that and you can do this and you can do that. So we're developing a graduation medallion where if you do a lot of those things, then you can actually be recognized for it at graduation. A combination of both taking extra classes and doing research and academic stuff and participating in a multitude of our activities, you can have a graduation medallion. So we've been working with the provost and external relations and all the necessary people that are involved with graduation to roll this out. And so it's currently on the provost's desk for review, and we're working on how we would track that using Blackboard and things like that. So that's a little bit what I do. Any questions about my office or any of those programs so far? So I want to get to the first theme, which is what it was like, what it is like to have a position that didn't exist before. And the two things I would say about it is a big challenge is figuring out what's important to spend time on. Because I have no sort of precedent of the coordinator of global learning does this. All I have is the global learning coordinator is supposed to make sure there's a lot of global learning activities to do. So it's kind of, you'll get a lot of, and collaboration is great. So that's why it's exciting to get a lot of contact from different people saying, well, let's do this event together, let's do that event together, let's bring you in on this program, do you want to co-sponsor this? And it's really challenging to, when you have this 40-hour work week and a limited amount of time and resources and funding, to figure out what's really worthwhile to your program to do. So you'll find some stuff that doesn't end up being so fruitful, like faculty members coming to you and saying that we are bringing this off-campus group onto campus to do a display. And you're like, that sounds great because it's on a really global topic. And then it turns out that that faculty member ends up asking you to do all the work because they don't know how to do anything, and you end up spending like 20, 30 hours working with Graham Center to get outdoor space and fill out all necessary forms to do outdoor work and making flyers because they have no idea who they need to go to do an event or how to use the computer to make flyers and all this stuff. And then at the end of the day, there's a decent event that is cool that our logo's on as a co-sponsor, but it's really this other department's event, and you've invested a lot of work in it, and it's besides the trade-off of work for credit for your office, there's also, it's not something that has longevity. So there are certain things I get involved in, for example, the Global Civic Engagement Mini Grants that Sonia's involved with out of Center for Leadership and Service, where this is a Center for Leadership and Service initiative that started within the past year or so, where Wells Fargo funds this program out of this FIU office, and students can apply for grant money to do community service projects. And this is something that I was invited to be involved in for global learning from the ground up. And it's proven to be very fruitful because students who want to do engaging things and help the community are able to get money for it. And it's great because it's really aligned with global learning. They're supposed to be globally themed service projects. It's a really productive thing, and it has longevity. It's an equal partnership between offices in terms of the amount of work, and it has longevity. This is something that will happen every semester, and so when we have on our website or when we're talking about what we do, it's something that this is a recurring thing. We have these grants, so they're great, they're partnership with this other office, but it's really trial or error, because that could have crashed and burned too. The other event that I didn't feel like went really well could have gone really well, so it's just been a lot of trial and error in what is it worth spending time on. And I kind of touched on it. There's a collaboration paradox, and this is something that I think will apply to your positions, even if it's not the first person to have the position, is what's the right amount of collaboration? Because, of course, the thing that you're supposed to say is collaboration's awesome, and that it's always great to have a partner, and it's a beautiful thing when you see there's an event put on by all these different departments working together, because all these departments at FIU are coming together and doing something good for the students. But in reality, there's the truth that if everything you do has all these co-sponsors, it doesn't really look like your department is doing anything on its own. And when it comes time to, there's a finite amount of budget to go around and political support to go around, it's really important to show that you have these keynote things. You have this conference every semester. You have this program. You have these things that are yours. Because if everything you're doing is in partnership with other people, then you don't really need your office to exist. You could just be absorbed into these other people that you're corresponding with all the time anyway. So you want to look like, man, we work well with others, but we are here to stay and important on our own. And so it's always a lot of tricky balancing in terms of how that goes. So I ended up kind of by accident outside of the Division of Student Affairs. Clearly coming up through the orientation peer advisor route, my thought process going into the program was student affairs is what I'm interested in. I'm more into the process of college and the college experience and getting involved in any particular academic discipline. Therefore, with what I knew about opportunities at the time, it seemed like student affairs was the place to be. I got into global learning the way that I told you, kind of. The opportunity presented itself. I happened to be a presenter about it. I came into the program when student affairs GA-ships weren't really available, and then a full-time job came out of it. So I kind of accidentally ended up outside of the Division of Student Affairs, and I really like it, particularly in my role because it's student affairs-y enough, working with student groups and activities and things like that, but also has a lot more of an academic tinge to it. So I have one more question for a brave person, because I want to see how you guys feel about this. Can someone tell me your perception now about the academic affairs, faculty, student affairs relationship, how you perceive it to be? Yes.
They don't do anything with one another.
Okay. Do you have any why that might be, or it's just the way it is? Or?
The interests, I would just assume that their interests aren't really aligned, when in all actuality they kind of are.
Mm-hmm.
Not even kind of, they are.
Mm-hmm.
The main interest should be serving students.
Okay. Exactly. It's true that they don't work together typically well. Any other perceptions of if you've experienced otherwise or the same, or why that might be? Yeah.
I have the feeling that the teachers just feel that the student affairs people, because they are not taught, they just don't know what it's like to be in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess if student affairs people had a little bit more classroom experience, they could probably see more eye to eye.
Okay.
Because the goals are kind of spread. They're not being measured on the same goals.
Okay. So that's they're not measured on the same thing. That's something that is absolutely true. And I was kind of hoping someone wouldn't touch on so that I could share that. But it's true, they're not measured on the same thing. So I heard from you from how one side see the others. So faculty might see that student affairs people don't really have an academic upbringing or teaching skills. How do student affairs people see faculty? Yes.
One of the things that I've noticed is that when there's an event in student affairs or there's an event for faculty, they're sent to those people. They're not sent to higher education. So if there's a student affairs event, academic affairs doesn't get that. So I work in advising, and when they send out something on the student affairs listserv, I don't know about it unless somebody tells me about it. So I think I've noticed that with a lot of the advisors that got into it through student affairs, there's kind of a disconnect when they would like to go to those types of events.
Okay. So people that aren't in student affairs don't hear about student affairs events. Is that because student affairs don't bother to tell the people on the other side, or because the other side is not interested and therefore they don't continue to pass it along or create buzz? What, which side, if I can ask you to take a side, is at fault for that, or both? A little both. I don't understand it. I understand if you don't want to take sides on camera. It's cool. Any other perceptions about this issue? So I'm a proud alumni. I'm not an alumna. I'm a proud, even though gender alumna. No, I got this right. Alumna is female. So I'm an alumnus. I'm an alumnus. Gender-specific pronouns that's who cares. So I'm an alumna, alumni, alumnus. Who cares? So I'm a proud alumnus of this program, and I have a lot of positive things to say about it. really, the only criticism I have of it, at least as it was when I was in it, I have my opinions about there not being capstone anymore, but that's neither here nor there, and I'm sure you guys don't mind that. But my one criticism of it, the way that it was when I was here, because everything else I really did love, was how student affairs centric it was. And this is a post hoc criticism of it, because it's not necessarily something I minded when I was in the program and had a very student affairs mindset. But now that I'm working on the academic side of the house, I have a list of things that going through a student affairs centered program did prepare me well for, and a list of things that it didn't. So I'll start with the positive, because I don't want to. I'm a very proud alumnus of this program. So I'll start with the positive. So I was very well prepared for event planning, promotion, and logistics. As you can tell from my story about having to do all the work for this faculty member, faculty are useless when it comes to, I need to think about how I'm phrasing things on camera. Faculty members are typically not as experienced in event planning logistics, specifically when it comes to having broad-based knowledge of who all the people are on the campus and what all the policy and procedures are for doing event planning. Useless is not a term that I condone using for faculty members. I'm specifically speaking in general about this one aspect of you need rooms and you need flyers and you need all this stuff. In my experience, faculty members typically have less expertise in that area because they are very knowledgeable in research and other things that are not related to event planning. And of course, that's a generalization. So I feel like coming out of a student affairs program, I find myself being very good at knowing, okay, we have this great idea as an event. Let's move it from this intellectual, let's talk about what the event is supposed to achieve and what we want to do, and taking it to, okay, here's the room, here's all the people we're promoting it to, here's the flyer, here's all the screens that need to go to, all the social media profiles it needs to go on, all the forms that need to be filled out, and it's going to be an awesome, great event with giveaways and sign-in sheets and AV and all of that. And so that's awesome. And that came out of both being involved in student affairs, but also, the type of, student life and culture and things like that. I think won't necessarily give you the specifics of how to do that, but touch on the importance of events in life and things like that. I can touch on being on a student affairs-based program. You appreciate more broad-based operational knowledge of the university. A lot of faculty, because they're brought up in their disciplines, are very focused on knowledge for their discipline, and typically, generally speaking, again, know less about that university's policies and procedures outside their own department, and again, who's who and what's what, and institutional, different departments and things, where student affairs folks tend to be very aware of all the different programs and services and resources that students can take advantage of. And this one's really important, and it's a student development theory thing. How many of you have done student development theory already? Oh, I will tell you one thing. Nobody outside of student affairs has ever heard of student development theory. I went to Global Learning and mentioned student development theory. I don't know if it was during the interview or very soon after starting there, and I got like a blank stare. What's that? I've never met a faculty member outside of higher education who's ever known that student development theory ever existed. So while it's very practical for your line of work if you're staying in student affairs, just know that it's not something anyone else has ever heard of or used, at least in my experience. I don't know if you know different, but I haven't experienced it anywhere else. But the one thing for student development theory, even though like all of you, if it's either drifting or it's going to drift, the one thing from student development theory that I think is fantastic and that I really appreciate having in a non-student affairs role is meeting students where they're at. I think faculty members tend to have less understanding of their relationship to the student in terms of development. And so when I'm in meetings with faculty, and faculty tend to be very critical of their students in terms of they're not trying, or they're not putting enough effort, or they're not mature enough, that coming through a student affairs program as opposed to through a discipline or through faculty administration program, really understanding that it's okay that students aren't where you are, and your job, your career, your life's calling, what you get paid for is to help them get to where you are, is something that I really admire the program for. The things that it didn't prepare me at all for is working with or understanding faculty. So part of it is just the divide. It's a large institution, most state universities and any state are large institutions, and when you're that large, it's just hard to work across silos. It's just how it is. I mean, there's so many people, they're all doing so many things and pulling in different directions. It's just part of how it is. Some faculty members are also just jaded and mean, like, I'm not going to lie, and I can say that on camera because I said some faculty members you just can't work with. However, I've learned a lot about what the role of a faculty member is and what it is that they are motivated by that the program didn't really tell me anything about. So I did know from the program that faculty, their main thing is research, and there's the trifecta of, and this probably does come up in class on the surface level of, research, teaching, and service. And so those tend to be the three things that faculty are hired, evaluated, and promoted on. And so, of course, I'm speaking about professors, full professors, assistant professors. There are a lot of adjuncts and instructors and other job titles that are teaching is the majority of the job. But for the most part, people who are on a professor job title, specifically tenure track, but even some non-tenure track, if it's a professor, a typical research line thing, there's research, teaching, and service. And research is the primary thing for which professors are evaluated and hired and promoted. So really anything that they do has to be able to support their research. That's number one. Number two is what is the working life of a professor? We're used to student affairs. We have, I don't want to say 9 to 5 because student affairs folks work weekends and work nights and all this stuff, but it's more of a traditional office job. You have these working hours, you're in your office during the day, whereas faculty members, pretty much, the working hours are whenever they have class, whenever they have office hours, and whenever they need to be doing research, and even most of the time the research is done from home, done off-site, wherever they're interviewing people, wherever they're doing whatever research they're doing. So it tends to be much harder to get in touch with faculty members. So I think this can be misperceived as it's so hard to get in touch with these faculty members. They never answer their phones and they never respond, timely and this and that. And it's just hard. They're never in their office when I go there. And so that's just because of the work that I have a faculty member. But the big thing is understanding that as much as it seems like when you reach out to a faculty member saying, I'm having this great housing event at 8 o'clock at night and I'd love you to come speak, or I'm doing this other program and I'd love to have you on the advisory board for it or something like that, that you really need to think about in terms of someone who's being evaluated on what they're publishing on research in their field, how can you reach out to them in a way that is going to be valuable for them? To go a little further, it's not just about that helping them do research is valuable and not helping them do research is just neutral, where, it's not helping the research, but they're also not getting hurt, so to speak, and they just should do it out of the goodness of their heart. I've heard from faculty, and this varies by discipline. I don't know how to mention, you might not have this experience being in higher education where this type of thing is valued, but I've heard from faculty in other disciplines, this probably would be the case in education, where too much success in other areas besides research is bad for their reputations. I've been told by a faculty member that in this particular discipline, having a teaching award hurts in tenure and promotion because the mindset in a lot of disciplines is research is primary, therefore any time you're spending on things that aren't research is you could be doing more and better research if you weren't spending so much time teaching better. And so I think that's something that we kind of all find ridiculous, but I've literally been told this by faculty members. So, being on your advisory board for your program or coming to speak as a guest lecturer in something you're doing for your student affairs department may count technically as service when they need to do research, teaching, and service, but depending on who they are and what discipline they're in and what their colleagues think, even though it counts towards service, it's bad that they're doing that when they could be doing research. So I want to share a quick, example of a really successful student affairs faculty partnership I formed and how it was done. So I've formed a great partnership between my office is involved, and I'm the the broker here between student affairs, specifically the Global Living Learning Community, which is very student affairs because that's residential life and the Center for Leadership and Service, and a faculty member in the Department of Communication Arts. His name is Daniel Bloyer, and he's a research line, faculty member. And I've gotten this faculty member to come to the Global Living Learning Community once a month, which is very late at night. They meet at 8 o'clock, and they're 7 to 8 o'clock at night. And he works with them, and he comes to the meetings that we have in the Center for Leadership and Service, and he actually is on we have a NASPA, we put in a NASPA proposal for an upcoming NASPA conference, and he's in on that, even though NASPA is very student affairs-y. And this is all because there's value to him as a communication arts instructor to his research. We structured the project as such that it involves heavily communication. We're having the Global Living Learning Community students work on developing an issue guide about immigration and hosting a discussion forum about immigration open to FIU students in the community. His research, what he's typically doing before he got involved with us, is he'll look at a recording of a public town hall meeting or a school board meeting or something, and he'll analyze what's going on, like when are people comfortable speaking, and when are how do people get involved, and what type of people are there, what's being said, analyzing public meetings and stuff. So we've figured out a way that this student affairs project, helping students in the residence hall do an issue discussion open to the public, would be valuable to a faculty member's research, and gotten him to be able to be heavily involved in student affairs to the point that he does stay late at night and come to meetings in student affairs and apply for NASPA presentations. With us, and it's a really cool thing that's having a lot of really cool implications inside things. And I can keep going about these other chips that we do to an organization that works with that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of splinter things and other NASPA stuff, and it goes on and on and on about how much this is done. But it just goes to show you that if you know how to reach out and what they need, and you can find the overlap between what they're doing and what you want to do in student affairs, it's a really cool thing. And I work with, a lot of other stuff. I'm going to wind down here because I'm a little tired of talking, but I work with a lot of other stuff involving enrollment. I work mostly with activities, but I work a lot with, keeping track of enrollment of global learning courses and assessment of are the global learning courses really teaching global learning content, and it involves the major projects with Panther Soft and the Panther degree audit and these enrollment side of the house things that I don't know if there's maybe some elective classes that do cover those things in the program, but nothing that I was forced to be exposed to really did. So there's a lot of on-the-job learning. There's a lot of on-the-job learning going on there on things that weren't really covered in a student affairs program. That's my experience. I didn't forget.
Okay.
So I do want to talk specifically about this class because I like this class very much and have found some practical application for it. Okay. So I do want that to be part 2. But I want
I'll leave a few minutes for
I want
question and
the Q&A about this type of stuff to me now, and that'll be like addendum.
Okay.
What's the opposite of a preface?
Epilogue.
The epilogue, the part 2, the closing remarks will be the higher ed law stuff. So if there's anything.
Any questions about his transition from GA to now full-time?
Yes.
So you did your undergrad here, and
yes.
your master's, and now you currently work here.
Yes.
It's been a common thing that I've heard among different professionals in the field that when you stay at an institution for so long, it's looked down upon. Mm-hmm. So in thinking about that, do you have any reservations about either job searching or
yes.
what that looks like in the future for you?
Absolutely. That is a concern that I have. And as I start thinking about what I want to do my doctorate in and where, it is a consideration of whether I would stay at FIU or not. This is where I will get personal and kind of talk about like the work-life, career-life balance of that. It's not feasible for me to leave Miami for a number of reasons. One of my parents is not well at all, and therefore I need to be here for. I mean, has still years left, but she needs a lot of help. So that's my mom. So my mom needs a lot of help, therefore it's not reasonable to leave Miami. And the other 3 of my parents and parents-in-law are not unwell, but they're older. Both me and my wife had late than, I guess, average from parents. So our parents are in our 50s and 60s, and it's just personally important for us to be here while they're around because they won't always be. So it's a personal choice for me and for us to stay locally. Now, as far as other institutions locally, so far it's made the most sense to stay at FIU. I like public four-year institutions so far, and I'm definitely open to seeing other types of institutions in the area. But so far this is the public four-year institution of the area, and I've had this opportunity was presented to me to be the first person in this role, and I'm really enjoying it so far. And also currently, my wife just started in the College of Education in a master's program, and of course there's a tuition waiver, so I want to get her through that. And then, quite honestly, yes, there might be a trade-off of if I never get an experience somewhere else, but right now there's also things keeping me here that are more personal life than career planning, but I think they're important things. And then as far as when I do my doctorate, I would have serious reservations about doing a third degree here. However, if at the time, I probably still won't be willing to move out of Miami yet. That'll probably be as morbid as it is until all four parents are no longer alive is when we would stay in Miami. And then even then, we've talked about, I don't know how we would deal with snow, quite honestly. So maybe we won't even leave then. But at least until then. So yeah, I can try, seeing if I can move to, I don't know, Nova or something, but if I still really enjoy having a job here at FIU and this and that, I might just take the risk and do a third one here. I haven't really decided yet, but that was a really good question, and I do think about that quite often. Yes?
You mentioned getting your doctorate. Do you feel like you're going to stay in the student affairs route, or are you going to do higher education?
I'm definitely not going to do higher education only because I already have a master's in that, and that's kind of like going back to the having 3 FIU degrees. I kind of feel like having 2 there would be more diversity in having something else. I guess if I were absolutely sure I wanted to stay student affairs-y, I might, but I don't personally feel that for my doctorate. I don't know what I want to do it in. I would say most likely it would stay within the College of Education. Curriculum instruction or educational leadership might be candidates, but who knows, it might not be. So I've worked a lot with this communication arts faculty, and I've been doing a lot of my programming and work is about getting students to talk to each other and talk about issues. So if FIU had a communication arts doctorate, that might be an option, but it doesn't have one. That's just an undergrad program here. So anything's possible. I hope to maybe start in 2 years or so. So I have some time to think, but should start the thinking. But higher ed, most likely not. Education, probably, but not necessarily. Thanks. Yes.
I know earlier you mentioned about how there were certain things that you felt this program prepared you for.
Mm-hmm.
It was event planning.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm trying to find out, are you referring to that you were prepared for event planning because of extracurricular activities, or you actually mean the courses that we took here actually prepared you for some of that?
A little of both. Mostly extracurricular / the practical experiences of GA-ships and practicum. So definitely some of it was the program itself. I think I kind of caught myself thinking about that mid-answer and mentioned courses like student life and culture, which even though didn't help with necessarily the specific things of making flyers and reserving rooms, did address some of the important educational aspects of events and the importance of having a lively campus with things going on. Anything else? I guess I can go to epilogue then. So epilogue is what I got out of this course, the higher ed law, because I know it's for whatever reason seen as kind of like a scary course or whatever. But what I really got out of higher ed law was that every single case in the higher ed law book and every single case that's discussed is a real thing that happened to real students and real administrators that ended up going so horribly wrong that they ended up in a course and then later on in a textbook. So every single case that I read in this book is, man, this could happen to me one day. And this is something that when I'm working with students, I need to figure out how, when I'm advising students, to help them make decisions that are such that they won't end up in a future edition of the Law of Higher Education as having... So I saw it as a real opportunity to think about how can my students not end up in this book. So I've actually developed a program out of this class that I've done twice at the Student Leadership Summit, and have also done for various other things whenever there's opportunities to submit programs. So I have a list of some of the cases from the book that I found most interesting. The only one that I actually remember the name of is Sigma Chi versus George Mason, which you guys, so so this is the one where, and I promise you I do not remember everything from the program as much as the few things that I do remember, but this is a really good example of something that if you have a group of students, you could be dealing with undergrad students and talk about cases like this one and have a really fruitful conversation of what is the right and wrong thing to do. So my recollection of this case is that the fraternity was having a fundraiser. I'm pretty sure it was for whatever they were doing was for some sort of good cause. But the way they were going about fundraising was that they were having an ugly woman contest. And so other Greek organizations and people on campus were trying to dress up. I think they're mostly men dressing up as ugly women, including the use of blackface, to see who could be the ugliest, most offensive-looking woman, and whoever won, their charity would get the money or something like that. Is my recollection of it. So this makes for a really interesting conversation of the trade-off between you're doing something for a good cause, but it's really offensive, and it's really offensive, but it's a public university with free speech. I don't remember for sure if that school is public or not. So
George Mason is
not.
Sorry.
So I do this at FIU, so we get to talk about it at FIU. It's a public institution with free speech. So at that institution too. So the activity that I have has a bunch of cases that are ones that are interesting that undergrad students would want to talk about like that, and it has a brief synopsis of the situation, and then it says two things, and they get this before I even start talking or anything. And one is, do you think the organization should be allowed to do this? And then the second question is, do you think the organization should do this? And they answer those questions based on like 5 or 6 different cases from this book. And then we go, we go through each one. I have them go to 4 different corners of the room based on, you think they should be allowed and they should be allowed but they shouldn't, and so on and so forth. The most interesting corner is always they shouldn't be allowed but they should do it, because those are people who are saying it should be against the rules but you should do it anyway. So they always have interesting things to say. And then we go to the 4 corners of the room, we talk about it, they talk to each other about why. My favorite part of this activity is when people move to other corners of the room, because that's showing how if you listen to other people's perspectives you can change your own mind. I talk about, even though it's kind of irrelevant to the moral implications of the case, we talk about what the court did say. I remember the other case. My other favorite one is the one where the student newspaper said someone's job title was the director of butt licking. People like that one too. And then so we talk about it and this and that. And it's a really useful activity for any position that you work with where you're dealing with students. Like that's something you can do. And I've added an extra spin to it recently where, have any of you guys seen The Big Lebowski movie? No, just one? So, The Big Lebowski is an interesting movie. And so I saw this book called Big Lebowski and Philosophy, which actually talks about some of the decisions made by characters in The Big Lebowski. So I've added in some profanity-laden clips from Big Lebowski where they're making decisions to add a little bit of a comedic and thought-provoking element to it with the same student affairs cases. And it's always been incredibly interesting, especially when you're doing it. I've done it in classes with freshmen just for moral reasoning purposes, but it's particularly interesting when you're doing it at something like Student Leadership Summit, where all the people are presidents and even members of things, of Greek organizations and different student councils, where they are making those decisions, and it's proven to be something that's really interesting to do based on this class. So that's my epilogue. I did bring a little something for you guys to remember me and global learning by. Our office has these magnets, so I assume if those of you who have GA ships or practicums can stick them in your offices so that we're all over the place, or you can use them on your home refrigerator too. These talk about our global learning outcomes. I didn't get super into that, but at Global Learning, when I talk about the courses and activities, these are the 3 specific things that we want our students to learn. It's a global awareness, which is knowing not just what goes on around the world, but how it's all interconnected and what's going on in different parts of the world affect each other. A global perspective, which is not just what are all the different viewpoints on an issue, but why? Why do people see things differently? And global engagement, which is the willingness to get involved and solve problems and do something. So that's, when you hear about global learning at FIU, that's the specific definition of what it means. And so you can stick these wherever you see fit. And it was a pleasure talking to you guys.